The incident occurred on a Tuesday evening in the quiet, tree-lined suburb of Northwood Heights, a place where property values were as high as the privacy hedges. The subject was Dr. Imani Hayes, a 42-year-old black woman driving a late-model BMW 7 Series. She was stopped less than 3 blocks from her own home by Officer Brett Kincaid of the Northwood Police Department. The official reason for the stop, a supposed failure to signal a lane change on an empty street, was immediately suspect. The interaction quickly devolved from a routine traffic stop into a textbook case of racial profiling, with Officer Kincaid accusing Dr. Hayes of driving a stolen vehicle, attempting an illegal search, and ultimately, physically dragging her from her driver's seat onto the pavement. What Officer Kincaid did not know, what he could not possibly have conceived, was that the woman he was manhandling was not just a resident, but a director at the Central Intelligence Agency, a figure with more power in a single phone call than his entire department held. This is the story of that stop, a moment where unchecked bias collided with unassailable authority, resulting in the instant termination of one career and a stark reminder that some people are not to be trifled with. The strobing red and blue lights painted the serene suburban street in violent, pulsing strokes of color, shattering the twilight peace. Dr. Imani Hayes watched in her rearview mirror as the police cruiser screeched to a halt behind her, its headlights pinning her dark blue BMW like an insect under a microscope. She took a slow, deliberate breath, a technique she'd mastered for moments of high stress, though usually those moments involve classified briefings in soundproof rooms, not a traffic stop on her own block. She'd done nothing wrong. She had signaled her turn, was driving under the speed limit, and her registration was current. This was something else. She knew it with a certainty that left a cold pit in her stomach. She turned off the soft jazz playing through the speakers, placed her hands on the steering wheel at the 10-in-2 position, and waited. The silhouette of the officer approached, a slow, deliberate swagger in his walk. He paused by her passenger side window, his hand resting casually on the butt of his holstered firearm, a classic intimidation tactic. Imani rolled down her window. The officer, a white man in his late 30s with a thick neck and a haircut that was aggressively military, shone a blindingly bright flashlight into her face, then swept it across the cream-colored leather interior of her car. "License and registration," he said, his voice flat and devoid of any courtesy. "Not ma'am, not good evening, just a command." Imani reached slowly for the glove compartment, narrating her actions. "I am retrieving my vehicle's registration and proof of insurance now, officer." She handed the documents out the window, then retrieved her wallet from her purse on the passenger seat. She handed him her driver's license. He took the documents, his eyes lingering on her, then on the car, a flicker of something between suspicion and resentment in his gaze. He looked at the license. Dr. Imani Hayes. The address was just 2 streets over, on Sycamore Lane, one of the most exclusive parts of Northwood Heights. He looked from the ID back to her face. "This your car?" he asked, the question loaded with disbelief. "Yes, it is," Imani replied, her voice perfectly even. "Registered to this address?" He tapped the license with a thick finger. "Yes, I live here. I was on my way home from the office." "The office," he repeated, a smirk playing on his lips. "And what kind of office pays for a car like this?" The question was a naked provocation, a line so far over professional conduct it was in another zip code. This was no longer about a traffic stop. This was an interrogation of her right to exist in this space, in this car, with this skin. Imani's training kicked in. De-escalate. Control the encounter. Do not give him an excuse. "I have a good job, officer. Is there a reason you pulled me over?" He ignored her question, his flashlight beam landing on her briefcase on the passenger seat. It was a discreet but expensive leather bag. "What's in the bag?" he demanded. "My work laptop and some files," she said calmly. "I need you to pop the trunk. And I'm going to need to take a look inside that bag, with all due respect, officer," Imani said, her voice dropping slightly but losing none of its precision. "You have no probable cause to search my vehicle or my personal belongings. You haven't even told me why you initiated this stop." Officer Kincaid's face tightened, the casual arrogance hardening into something uglier. He clearly wasn't used to being challenged, especially not by a black woman in a luxury car in his neighborhood. "Failure to signal a lane change back on Elm Street," he snapped, finally providing a reason, likely one he'd just invented. That gives me all the cause I need. Now, are you going to cooperate, or do you want me to add obstruction to the list? Imani knew the law. A minor traffic infraction did not grant an officer carte blanche to conduct a fishing expedition. He was banking on her not knowing her rights, on her being too intimidated to assert them. He had miscalculated badly. Officer, I can assure you I signaled that lane change. My vehicle records all driving data, including turn signal usage. Furthermore, unless you have a reasonable, articulable suspicion that I have committed a crime or that there is contraband in this vehicle, a search would be unlawful. I do not consent to any searches. A tense silence stretched between them, punctuated only by the crackle of his radio. Kincaid stared at her, his jaw working. He saw her composure not as the mark of a law-abiding citizen, but as the defiance of a criminal. In his world, she was an anomaly that needed to be put in her place. Step out of the car, he ordered, his voice low and menacing. Right now, the situation was escalating precisely as he intended. He was pushing her, daring her to refuse, so he could justify what he wanted to do next. Imani felt a surge of cold anger, but she kept it locked down tight behind a mask of impassivity. Am I being detained, officer? She asked, using the precise legal terminology. Or am I free to go? You are being detained, he growled. Now get out of the car before I pull you out. He moved to her driver's side door and put his hand on the handle. From across the street, a curtain twitched in a window. Further down, a man walking his dog had stopped, his phone held up, the small red light of a recording blinking in the dusk. Kincaid noticed the audience, and it seemed to fuel his aggression rather than temper it. He was performing now, asserting his dominance for all to see. Officer, Imani said, her voice still steady. I am requesting your name and badge number. I would also like to request that you call your supervisor to this location. This was the final straw for Kincaid. The request for a supervisor was a direct challenge to his authority. His face flushed a deep, mottled red. I'm the only authority you need to worry about tonight, sweetheart, he sneered. He yanked the door open. Last chance. Get out. Imani remained seated, her hands still visible on the steering wheel. You are making a grave mistake. Officer, he didn't reply. He reached in, his thick fingers grabbing her left arm just above the elbow. His grip was brutal, a crushing pressure designed to inflict pain and force compliance. She didn't scream or struggle. She turned her head and looked directly into the lens of the body camera she knew was pinned to his chest. Officer Brett Kincaid, badge number 714, is now physically assaulting me without cause. Time is 1942 hours. Her voice was like ice. The use of his full name and badge number, which she'd read from his uniform in a single glance, momentarily startled him. But he was too far gone, too committed to this path of dominance. With a furious grunt, he hauled her from the driver's seat. Her seatbelt caught, and for a horrible second, she was tangled, half in and half out of the car, before the buckle released. He dragged her clear of the vehicle, spinning her around and shoving her against the cold metal of the door. The impact knocked the wind out of her. He twisted her arm behind her back, forcing her into a painful position, reaching for his handcuffs. This was it, the ultimate humiliation. Pinned against her own car, on her own street, treated like a common criminal because he could not accept the reality of who she was. You have the right to remain silent, he began, his voice breathless with exertion and rage. It was in that moment, with the cold steel of the handcuff about to bite into her wrist, that Imani decided the time for de-escalation was over. The time for education had begun. Stop, she said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the air with an authority that was absolute, making him pause for a fraction of a second. Before you compound your series of felonies with another, I suggest you look inside my wallet. It's in my jacket pocket, Kincaid scoffed, the sound a mix of contempt and disbelief. You think a fancy lawyer's business card is going to help you now? Yet, he hesitated. Something in her tone, a complete lack of fear and a chilling certainty, gave him a flicker of doubt. It was the tone of someone who was not asking, but commanding. Driven by a tiny, nagging seed of self-preservation, he released the pressure on her arm slightly and, with his other hand, reached into her blazer pocket. He pulled out her slim leather wallet. He flipped it open, his eyes scanning for the driver's license he'd already seen. But that's not what caught his eye. Behind the plastic window where the license sat was another ID. It was stark white, with minimal text, but the symbol at the top was unmistakable, even in the dim light. It was the bold, predatory eagle of the Great Seal of the United States, clutching arrows and an olive branch. Below it, in severe block letters, were the words, Central Intelligence Agency. And beneath that, her picture, and a title that made the air freeze in his lungs. Directorate of Analysis. Officer Kincaid's entire body went rigid. The blood drained from his face, leaving a pasty, sick-looking mask. His knuckles, which had been white from gripping her arm, went slack. He stared at the ID, then at her face, then back at the ID. The world had just tilted on its axis. The woman he had just dragged from a car, the woman he was about to cuff for obstruction, was one of the highest-ranking officials in the entire United States intelligence community. He was not holding a car thief. He was holding a person who briefed presidents. This is a fake, he whispered, the words tumbling out, devoid of his earlier conviction. It was a desperate plea to a universe that had suddenly turned against him. Imani drew herself up to her full height as his grip loosened completely. She calmly took the wallet from his trembling hand. A felony to forge, a felony to possess if fraudulent, and a felony you are now committing by illegally detaining a federal officer, she stated, her voice a blade of cold steel. But please, continue to believe it's fake. My phone is in my other pocket. You have my express permission to retrieve it. On the favorite screen, there is an entry labeled AG. I suggest you call it. On speaker. I'm sure the Attorney General of the United States would be very interested to hear about this stop. The name hung in the air between them. A nuclear bomb of a name drop. The Attorney General. Kincaid looked as if he'd been physically struck. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. His body cam would later show his pupils were dilated, his breathing ragged. He was a man watching his entire life, his career, his future, flash before his eyes and burn to ash. He did not reach for the phone. He couldn't. His hands were shaking too violently. He took a staggering step back, then another, creating distance from her as if she were radioactive. The power dynamic had not just flipped, it had been annihilated. He was no longer a cop asserting authority. He was a terrified man who had just assaulted one of the most powerful women in the country. His radio crackled to life, but this time it wasn't the calm, routine chatter of dispatch. The voice was sharp, panicked. 714, what is your 20? Captain Rogers is en route to your location, ETA 2 minutes. Advise, Chief just got on the horn, he's coming from home. What is going on over there, Kincaid? The system was already screaming. A stop that involved a director of the CIA had tripped silent, high-priority alarms she hadn't even needed to activate herself. Her position, her very identity, was a security protocol. The local police captain and the chief of police were scrambling, racing toward a career-ending firestorm that Kincaid had single-handedly ignited. The man who had been walking his dog was no longer trying to be discreet. He was standing on the sidewalk, phone held high, recording the entire scene. The neighbor whose curtain had twitched was now standing on their porch, a dark silhouette against a lit doorway. The audience was growing, and they were all watching Officer Brett Kincaid completely unravel. He looked from Imani to the approaching headlights that signaled the arrival of his captain, his face a mask of pure terror. He had built his world on a foundation of perceived superiority and the power of his uniform. In the span of 30 seconds, she had demolished it, leaving him exposed and utterly powerless. He had pulled over a ghost, a woman who operated in the highest echelons of national security, and he had treated her like a piece of dirt on the sole of his boot. The first vehicle to arrive was not a standard cruiser, but a black, unmarked sedan that screamed senior command. It pulled up silently, and Captain Rogers, a man with 25 years on the force, practically fell out of the car before it had fully stopped. He was a portly man, usually composed, but his face was pale and slick with sweat. He took in the scene in a single, horrified glance. Kincaid standing frozen, his subordinates' obvious terror. The woman standing calmly by her BMW, radiating an aura of untouchable authority. The civilian recording it all. Roger's eyes landed on Imani. He didn't know who she was, but he knew this was a Category 5 disaster. Ma'am, he began, his voice strained. I'm Captain Rogers. Is there a problem here? Imani didn't even look at him. Her gaze was still locked on Kincaid, pinning him in place. Your officer has committed multiple felonies, Captain. Unlawful detainment, illegal search attempt, and assault, for a start. All predicated on what appears to be a racially motivated stop. Rogers walked forward cautiously, and Imani held up her ID. The captain leaned in, squinted, and then physically recoiled as if he'd touched a hot stove. He looked at Kincaid with an expression of such profound disbelief and fury that Kincaid flinched. Kincaid, Rogers said, his voice a choked whisper. What did you do? Before Kincaid could stammer out a reply, another car, this one the chief's personal vehicle, arrived with a squeal of tires. Chief Matheson, a man known for his political savvy and carefully managed public image, emerged. He was still in civilian clothes, a polo shirt and slacks, having clearly rushed from his home. He saw Rogers' face, saw Kincaid's state, and then he saw Imani Hayes. He recognized her. Not personally, but from high-level security briefings with federal partners. The blood drained from his face even faster than it had from Kincaid's. Oh God, Matheson breathed. He approached Imani not as a chief of police, but as a supplicant. Director Hayes, my deepest, most profound apologies. This is an inexcusable, catastrophic failure on our part. Imani finally turned her attention from Kincaid to the chief. Her expression was unreadable, her eyes cold and analytical. She wasn't a victim anymore. She was a director assessing a catastrophic operational failure. Your apologies are noted, Chief Matheson. They are, however, insufficient. She pulled out her own phone. Her movements were fluid and efficient. She didn't dial 911. She didn't call a lawyer. She tapped a single icon on her screen. The person on the other end answered before the first ring had even finished. Her side of the conversation was brief, clipped, and terrifying in its implications. This is Hayes. I have a situation. Northwood P.D. Civil rights violation. Officer Brett Kincaid, badge 714. Yes, an unlawful stop and assault. I have vehicle cam footage, audio, and multiple civilian witnesses. I am formally requesting a federal investigation by the DOJ's Civil Rights Division into this department's patterns and practices. I'll forward my full report within the hour. She hung up. She had not raised her voice. She had not threatened. She had simply stated a course of action, and in doing so, had declared war on his entire department. Chief Matheson looked like he was going to be sick right there on the pristine asphalt of Sycamore Lane. He turned to Captain Rogers. Get him out of here. Now. Relieve him of his service weapon. Take his badge. Place him on administrative leave effective immediately. Get him in a car and take him back to the station. No radio traffic. Do it now, Rogers, grateful for a direct order, grabbed a shell-shocked Kincaid by the arm and marched him to his cruiser. The roles were now fully reversed. The arrogant enforcer was now a prisoner, being escorted away in disgrace in front of the very people he had tried to intimidate. The witnesses watched in stunned silence as Kincaid was disarmed and placed in the back of a police car, not as an officer, but as a liability being quarantined. The fallout was immediate and brutal. Before the sun rose the next day, the story, fueled by the viral bystander video, was the lead item on every national news network. The shaky phone footage showed it all: Kincaid's aggression, Imani's impossible calm, and the horrifying moment he dragged her from the car. Then came the reveal, the sight of two senior police officers arriving and practically bowing in apology. Officer Brett Kincaid was fired by noon. The Northwood City Council convened an emergency session. The mayor issued a public statement, a cowering, jargon-filled apology that satisfied no one. The Department of Justice formally announced its investigation that same afternoon, citing credible evidence of systemic misconduct. The institution, forced into the light, was scrambling to cauterize a wound that threatened to become septic. But for Imani Hayes, the victory was a bitter one. A few days later, sitting in her actual office, a secure, quiet room with a view of the Virginia woodlands, she watched a news report detailing the firing. They called her a hero, a symbol of grace under pressure. But she didn't feel like a hero. She felt tired. She had survived her encounter not because the system worked, but because she carried a shield few others possessed. Her power had saved her, but the incident was never really about her. It was about the countless others who looked like her, who drove nice cars, who lived in nice neighborhoods, and who didn't have a CIA ID in their wallet. It was about the people for whom a stop like that wouldn't end with a disgraced cop and a DOJ investigation, but with handcuffs, a jail cell, or worse. She picked up a thick file from her desk, the first report from the DOJ's preliminary findings on the Northwood P. D. was filled with statistics, a grim tally of racially biased stops and uninvestigated complaints. Kincaid was not an anomaly. He was a symptom of a deep-seated disease. Her fight hadn't ended on that quiet suburban street. It had just begun. Her vindication was not in Kincaid's firing, but in the work yet to come, in using the power he had so foolishly challenged to hold the entire system accountable. She had been targeted because of who he thought she was, but he would be remembered only because of who she actually is.